Hey guys, welcome back to my classroom channel. Today we're going to talk about two different things. The skill that we're learning is characterization. I know you guys already know how to characterize people, but we're going to learn it through the Epic of Gilgamesh. So you see this bright blinking yellow light over here, and that's what is going to help us navigate through our Prezi. So let's go ahead and get started. So some facts about Gilgamesh. It's ancient Babylonian mythology. Up until 1990, there are 5 works that we knew were written about Gilgamesh, but there have been lots of others since. It had some influence on the story of the Odyssey. You'll see that when we start reading it. It was lost for a really long time, rediscovered and translated in the 1800s. And there are lots of similarities between Gilgamesh mythology and the Hebrew Bible. And you'll kind of see why that is. They take place in and around the same area, the Fertile Crescent area, the Mediterranean Sea area. This is all, the land between the two rivers. This is an ancient land that still exists, but it was very much the center of a lot of the Bible and also of the Epic of Gilgamesh. So you can see it up here in the upper right hand corner of the map. Some themes and topics. Remember that themes are the message that we're supposed to interpret from the story, and topics are just one-word things that we address in the story. So some topics that we're going to see are violence, lust. There's a lot of sex in this story. I'm going to go ahead and warn you. We're going to talk a lot about brotherly love and friendship. We're going to talk about death too. And we're also going to talk about the dangers of crossing the gods. One of our major themes is love as a motivating force in life. The characters in the story are motivated and moved by different kinds of love. That's a physical love. It's a brotherly love. We'll just have to see who loves who and in what ways. So one of our main characters is Gilgamesh. He was a real person, and he ruled sometime around 2800 to 2500 BC in the kingdom of Uruk. He was known to be strong. Legend has it that he was 2/3 god, 1/3 human, very handsome, really has a potent sex life, and all he really wants is eternal life, is what his main goal is. And you'll see that in the story as we read. And then we have Enkidu. You can see him down here. He's the one on the left in the picture, and that's Gilgamesh that he's fighting. He is just as strong as Gilgamesh, which is important. That's kind of how they meet. He's born and made out of clay and goddess spit. He is wild and hairy until he has sex for 7 days and nights straight, and then all of his hair falls off. And he is definitely Gilgamesh's BFF bromance, for sure. They fight first, as men often do. They fight first and then become besties for the resties. One of the only female characters that's not a god, or goddess, is Shamhat the prostitute. She is the one who is charged with taming Enkidu the wild man. She is the one who teaches him her womanly ways, and basically that means having sex with him. So she tames the wild man, and she persuades him to come and live in the city with her and lead a civil life, and that's where he ends up meeting or hearing about Gilgamesh and then meeting Gilgamesh. Humbaba is one of our main antagonists. Antagonist doesn't always mean bad guy, but in this case, Humbaba is a bad guy. He is a fearsome monster, and he guards the cedar forest, which is where the gods live. As you can see, he's quite a good-looking fella. In the story, he's described having a mouth of fire, a roar of flood, breath of death, and a face that is shaped out of the guts of men and beasts. He can hear for like something like over 60 leagues, so men don't go near him because they're afraid that they'll meet their end. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu have to be brave and encounter Humbaba. So there's Utanapishtim, okay, which the name means he who saw life. He comes along a little later in the story. Utanapishtim was alive when the great flood came and destroyed everything except for him. He tricked others into building a boat that saved him and then watched them all die. So maybe think about like what kind of person he is. You can also draw a parallel to the Hebrew Bible with the flood, Noah and the ark, the flood. This is like the slightly evil version of Noah's ark, I guess, without the animals. He lives forever. Utanapishtim is immortal. And he really doesn't give a crap about Gilgamesh's quest for eternal life, and he tries to like test Gilgamesh, and you'll read more about how he does that in the story. So I'm not going to let you watch these videos right now because they're actually attached to your Actively Learn, but they are great videos that you can find on YouTube. The Thug Notes is always my favorite. So let's do a little characterization review. Up here at the top, characterization is telling who a person is by what they think, say, do, or look like. There are 4 ways to characterize somebody: think, say, do, or look like, okay? There are 2 different ways that it branches off into characterization. That's direct characterization and indirect characterization. And we'll talk about direct first. Direct characterization comes directly out and says the characteristics, often seen in what the character looks like or feels. You have to ask yourself, what does that tell you about the character? If the answer is stupid, dumb, super obvious, and you don't have to guess, then that is direct characterization. So like we have some example sentences down here. She was tired, weak, and hungry at the end of her journey. So you would ask yourself, what does that tell me about the character? Well, it tells me she was tired, weak, and hungry at the end of her journey. So it's pretty simple. Tired, weak, and hungry. That tells us what she is, direct characterization. We got another one. He was curious about the reason she had such a sly grin on her face. What does that tell us about him? He was curious. What does that tell us about her? She had a sly grin. So direct characterization, because it comes right out and says what she and he both had on their face or how they were feeling, okay? The last one at the bottom talks about how a character looks. It says she was an ugly woman. There was no denying it. So what does that tell us about the character? She was ugly. Period. Period, sis. Okay? It's that simple. If it comes right out and says she was an ugly woman, he was fat, she was thin, they were dumb, that's direct characterization. Gilgamesh was strong, direct characterization. Enkidu was hairy, direct characterization. Shamhat was a prostitute, direct characterization. So the other side of characterization is indirect characterization. This, you have to spend a little more time guessing about the character, giving the context clues. Often you can see your indirect characterization when it talks about what the character does or says. You have to think, what does this say about the character? So our first example sentence here, it says, when I yelled at her, she just looked down at her hands and sighed. So you could infer from what she looked down at her hands and sighed. You could infer that maybe I had yelled at her before, or that she was sad. And that's indirect characterization. She was staring out the window in a daze. She hadn't heard a single word I said. That's indirect characterization because we have to come up with the emotion that she's feeling. She could be sad or confused or just daydreaming or lost. She could be any of those things, but we need a little more information from the story to help us figure out why she's staring out the window and why she's feeling. "I'm not going in there," he said, pointing at the haunted house, is our third example sentence. So using context clues, we can infer, we can indirectly characterize that this person is scared because they're pointing at a haunted house and exclaiming, "I'm not going in there." Thus and therefore, he might be scared. Okay? Indirect characterization takes a little more guesswork than direct characterization does. Okay? And you might not always get it right the first time, and that's okay. We just have to remember to use our context clues and think to ourselves, what does this action or this thought or this, what the character says, what does that say about who that person is on the inside? What does that say about who this person is on the inside? It's the number one question that you need to consider when you're talking about characterization. What does that say about the person on the inside? Who's that person really? Okay? So that's kind of the end of our presentation. I don't really know what this is doing right here. But thank you guys for tuning in. And I hope you love the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's one of my favorites. And we'll talk more about characterization as we move through the unit.